Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me in the Winning Momentum podcast. I'm your host, Scott Sinclair. Did you know that 90% of all new businesses fail? 90% of all new businesses fail in the sense that they never, ever pay their founder a living wage. Another 8% survive. They pay their founder a living wage, but they never create wealth. The wealth is not transferred to a third party when the owner, manager, the founder wants to retire. The business is not saleable. It's not prepped for sale. It just kind of fizzles out and goes away, which leaves 2% of businesses that actually succeed in the sense that they can pay a wage and create some wealth for their founder. The point of this show, the point of the Winning Momentum podcast, is to improve those odds. If you're an owner-manager, if you are an owner-manager, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a student, if you're an executive, a business executive in private companies or even smaller public companies, that's what this content is for, is to improve your odds of success in the business that you have responsibility for. On this podcast, we talk about mindset skills, because in owner-manager companies, in private companies, and smaller public companies, even you can't separate the business from the personal limitations, from the self-limitations of its leaders. And so we talk about dealing with those limitations on the Winning Momentum podcast and the related content that I put out. We talk about leadership skills, so mindset skills, leadership skills, because you need to lead people through change. I work predominantly with troubled companies, so we talk about extreme examples of cultural change and changing momentum within a business. And a lot of that has to do with leadership. How do you move your team from here to there and see those tangible results? We talk about technical skills because you can't run out of money as you're doing this change. You need to be able to run your business better, and this is the math of the situation. So we have leadership skills, mindset skills, and technical skills would be the three broad buckets of the Winning Momentum content, and I hope that is helpful to you in your business ambitions and dreams. Don't forget, we're talking about winning momentum, because how do you define success when you're trying to fix a business? When is the job over? Is it ever over? Right? So what is success, and who gets to define that? Well, I believe in momentum. If you wake up this morning and you know that today is going to be a little better than yesterday, well, that's winning momentum. And if your employees wake up and they know that today will be a little better than yesterday, then that's winning momentum from their perspective. And that is what success is. I think life is all about momentum, no matter what direction it's going. You don't have to necessarily be profitable today. You don't have to have positive cash flow today. You don't have to have growing revenue today. You don't have to have a bunch of followers on social media. You need to, those are absolute definitions. Those are black and white, success, not success. I believe in momentum, which is that we're heading in this direction and things are better, according to our definition, than they used to be. And that's the most, when you generate this positive momentum, you generate interest in your business, in your enterprise, in you personally. You generate interest, and that's both human and financial. People want to come work with you. You could be losing money. You could be in trouble every day. But if you generate some excitement and a positive direction, you can attract talent and you can attract money. So both human and financial resources want to be associated with a company that's moving up. They do not want to be associated with a company that is moving down. This is episode 193 of the Winning Momentum podcast, although the rebranding to the Winning Momentum podcast was done maybe 4 or 5 episodes ago. And if you're a regular listener, you would know that we are doing half the time interviews, half the time, the next week. Sorry about that. The next week would be solo content like I'm doing today. So good thing I have my Roadcaster with my mute button here as I'm choking on my bourbon talking to you. So so we're doing some interviews. We're doing some solo content. You can go check out all the past content on thescottsinclair.com, thescottsinclair.com, the new website. When you go there, you can join the newsletter. You can become a follower. So hit those buttons, get your name on the list, and you won't miss any content. That's a great place to go follow this. So let's get on with this. I have a couple of things I want to talk to you about today. Number one would be Elon Musk. We can't just pass up that story. Breaking news today. While I was preparing for this, by the way, I know this is being released Tuesday morning, 5 a.m. Eastern as normal, but we're doing this I'm recording this now on April 25th. So Monday, late afternoon, my time. And it was announced today that the board of Twitter has accepted a deal with Elon Musk, who many report as the richest man in the world. Elon, anytime somebody asks him that question, would say he is not the richest man in the world. That, for example, Vladimir Putin is multiples of wealth ahead of Elon Musk, according to Elon Musk. And anyways, extraordinarily rich guy, and he's agreed to pay $44 billion for the social media platform Twitter. And it would be a going private transaction. Now, a couple of reasons I want to talk about this story. One is it's always fun when billionaires are fighting. It always makes for, fun conversation. Elon Musk himself is such a entertaining, influential, genius level fellow that just everything he does is interesting. I mean, absolutely everything he does is interesting. And it's an M&A deal between Elon Musk and whatever organization he has on the buy side and Twitter on the sell side, which gives us an excuse to talk about some mergers and acquisitions concepts. When I say M&A, I'm talking about mergers and acquisitions, which is a fancy way to talk about one company buying another or one company merging with another to make a combined entity, or some other strategic transaction which loosely would fall under that umbrella. And so there's lots of reasons I want to touch on this story. Mostly I just like it and enjoyed following it. So a little background. Musk is, as I've said, the richest guy in the world, they claim, unless you ask him. What are the companies that he is involved in, that he is CEO of, that he has started? Well, one would be Tesla, the electric car company, which, as of when I did this research, has a market cap of $1.18 trillion. What is a market cap? A market cap mathematically is the number of shares that are outstanding. So the number of shares of a company, which could be, any number depending on the history of that company and how they've issued out new stock and options and all that sort of stuff. But it's the number of shares outstanding in a company multiplied by the market price, right? Because it's a publicly traded stock. And so you can you see that the market, people buy and sell and trade at whatever price. That becomes the market price, or that is the market price multiplied by the number of shares, tells you what the market is valuing that company, what we say en bloc, as a whole. Okay, so the market cap, that's what market cap is, which cap being short for capitalization, is the value of the company, of the equity of the shares of the company as determined by market. $1.18 trillion for Tesla. SpaceX. So this is his rocket company. Going to colonize Mars, doing space rides. I think they launched somewhere the other day. I don't remember when, this week. And just fascinating, reusable rockets. Market cap of $74 billion. Endeavor Group, I'm not even sure what that is, $13.38 billion. The Boring Company. This is a technology, well, not just technology. Of course, everything with him is intellectual property and design. But this is a company that drills tunnels, creates tunnels underneath cities and just in general. And the idea is to move all traffic beneath the earth, where it's not susceptible to weather. and all sorts of other benefits. And so that company has $920 million of market capitalization. Neuralink, where they're literally going to put links, chips into your brain. They're going to remove a piece of your skull and implant chips in there. Market cap of $360 million. So this is what he does. And now he's buying Twitter for $44 billion. So there's lots of billions, $1.5 trillion or so of market capitalization. He, of course, doesn't own all of that, but he is an extraordinarily wealthy follower. So Elon Musk is an active Twitter user. For those of you that don't know, Twitter is a social media platform, and you can go on there and tweet, which used to be you could write 140 characters and you could blast that out to anybody who's following you. And I think it's more than 140 characters now. I don't tweet very often, but you could blast that out to who's ever following you. And then they could retweet it, so they could blast that out to whoever they follow. And if you have some success, lots of people read your tweet. So it's a broadcasting social media, and it has a lot of followers. Now, what's interesting about Elon Musk is that he's very active on Twitter. I think that's his primary social media, as opposed to Instagram or Facebook or some other social media platform. And Elon on Twitter has 84 million followers. 84 million followers follow his stuff. That's a lot of people. So when he writes a tweet, which he does a lot, and they're often very entertaining, 84 million people will receive that. And then, of course, they'll retweet it. Well, just basically the whole world is going to read Elon Musk's tweets. And, with all those companies with the $1.5 trillion or whatever the exact number is of market capitalization, Elon Musk's companies have no marketing department at all. They don't spend $1 on advertising. Never have. I don't think he's ever spent $1 on advertising. They don't have marketing departments. It's all him. And it's all him mostly on Twitter. And that's the tool that he uses to persuade. And if you're a personal branding person, if you're interested in that sort of space, what a guy to follow. What a guy to take inspiration from. Now, we're not all master persuaders like Elon Musk is, but this is his activity on Twitter. It's basically just him, and it's basically just Twitter. So in late March, Musk initially did a poll on his Twitter feed asking if he didn't say, should I buy Twitter? But it did say, well, actually, I have it here. He did a poll. It said, free speech is essential to democracy. Do you believe Twitter rigorously adheres to this principle? And then if you're not a Twitter user in a poll, you can basically say yes or no. But that was sort of letting the market in on that he's thinking about Twitter and maybe there's something he could do there. He later says, given that Twitter serves as the de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. So that's his view about Twitter and what's been going on at this company and its global importance as the quote-unquote town square. So following that, those tweets, a couple of days later, whatever the time frame was, Musk bought 9.7%, I believe the number was. 9.2, started with a 9 anyways. I think it was 9.7% of the entire company, and he just did it in the market. What you're allowed to do when you're buying a company, you're allowed to buy, you could go out and buy a block, 100 shares or whatever of Twitter, and then you're probably done, right? If you have an average middle income type of wealth, you buy your 1,000 shares or whatever the number is, and then you're done. But if you are a multi-hundreds of billionaire and you want to buy a bunch of a particular stock, like what do you do with that money? Well, there's caps. Most people don't know that, but there are caps on the amount of money, on the amount of percentage of a company that you can own without going through a process. So you can't just go to the market and buy 90% of Twitter. There's caps, and the caps change depending on the jurisdiction. I know we have a global audience here on the Winning Momentum podcast, but normally you can't buy more than 15%, 20%, somewhere in that range. in the market without filing some sort of disclosure statement with the regulators that tells them what the hell you're up to, or being forced to go through a process like if you buy that many shares, you need to buy them all, or at least give the shareholders a chance to sell to you and, at the same price. And so he bought 9.7% of the company of Twitter for $3 billion. So he got, and with that became the largest shareholder, at least for a week. He was the largest shareholder, and then another fund stepped up and upped their position. But he was the largest shareholder at the time that he bought this position. And because of that, he was asked to and had agreed to join the board of directors of Twitter. He was very vocal that he wasn't happy where the business was going. And they asked him to join the board, which is a group of people that are, controlling the company. Management reports to the board. So they don't do day-to-day management, but they're appointed by the shareholders to be the shareholders' representatives. And Musk was asked to join the board of directors, which initially he accepted. And then he started tweeting a bunch of stuff. He started tweeting improvement ideas for Twitter, like should there be an edit button? And if you don't use Twitter, well, you probably wouldn't know that if you make a typo in your 140 characters and then tweet it, hit send basically, you can't change it afterwards. You can delete it, but you can't edit it. So there should be an edit button. But the bigger things are, and that's just an annoyance for people on Twitter, they'd like to see that edit button. By the way, that seems obvious, right? But there's counter arguments to that as well, which is people, imagine you did an amazing tweet and, 2 months from now, you've got a bunch of likes from people and you can see who liked the tweet and who didn't like the tweet. Well, you can see who liked the tweet, maybe not the opposite. And a bunch of people have retweeted it. So they've sent it out to their network because they like what you said and they supported it. And then you go in and edit this to say something different, basically. You didn't delete the tweet, you actually edit it. And now these people are associated with retweeting something that should have been edited to begin with. Maybe you change the meaning and they don't want to be associated with it. So there's counter arguments to that. But anyways, he wants an edit tweet. Open sourcing the algorithm. And this is the big thing. The entire, in the culture wars, the entire issue surrounding Twitter and all social media platforms, I think, but Twitter in particular, is that people on the left think that misinformation and false information and antagonistic information, in their view, should not be something that's tolerated. It should just be banned, right? And so they're knocking off tweeters, people that use the platform that have huge followings. They're getting banned, they're getting suspended, all because management team at Twitter doesn't like what's being tweeted. So they're really controlling the speech. Now, it's not, people that say that say it as if it's a conspiracy or a, just an agenda, a narrative that's trying to be followed. But, there's a real business reason for this. If you're selling advertising, on this platform, which they are, you don't want to have a bunch of crazy talk on there that, falls within proper free speech, but also becomes a business problem. Like, who wants to advertise and be associated with that sort of talk? And so again, there's different sides to that. But then what happens is, it's never been proven, I don't think, certainly out in the open for people like me and non-techie people, but they talk about shadow banning, which means that your account is basically being pushed down the algorithm so no one ever sees your tweets, as opposed to other tweets which are being promoted for no particular reason. And Twitter has the ability to manipulate the conversation, the global conversation, and therefore the global persuasion. They have the ability to manipulate that by shadow banning, by pushing down the popularity of some tweets and the accessibility of some tweets versus versus promoting other tweets that fit within what they're trying to say. And so Musk's proposition is that maybe that all could just be out in the open, so you could just see what the algorithm does, right? Because it's not just some person hitting a button on your tweet and driving it up or driving it down. It's all within the algorithm, one would think. And he's proposed putting that out into the open. He proposed by tweet that that he learned that the employees of Twitter, for the most part or entirely, don't want to go back to work to the beautiful head office in San Francisco. So he tweeted out that when he bought the company, if he bought the company entirely, that the board should consider turning that head office into a homeless shelter, and then double down on that the next day with saying that he wasn't kidding. If they don't want to use it for offices, we should do something productive with it. Promised to get rid of the bots on the, not robots, but the bots on the Twitter for you non-techie people. This is just some computer program that actually tweets all day long and, harasses people. Twitter's a pretty ugly place from that perspective. And he said that he would authenticate all humans, which again is a big thing on Twitter. Is that a real person, or is it just some trolling robot coming after me? He tweeted out that the next board meeting would be lit. It will be lit, and included in that was a picture of him smoking a joint with a lot of smoke around him. He mused out loud in a tweet whether Twitter is dying, the company that he just spent $3 billion on. This is before he came to the deal today. He tweeted and said, is Twitter dying? And he pointed out the top 10 accounts in terms of followers, and that, a good percentage of them were never tweeting, like Obama, like a couple of pop stars. I can't think of their names at the moment. They have a ton of followers, very popular people, but they weren't using the platform. He tweeted out he had a good idea that he could save $3 million right now on the Twitter by just not paying the board of directors, $3 million a year. I'm sure that went out after. So this is all after he agreed to join the board. And then he decided he wasn't going to join the board, and Twitter started pushing back on him. There was lots of employees concerned. He announced he wouldn't join, and he made an offer to the whole company on April 4th, to the board to buy the whole company. So he already owed the 9.7%. Made an offer on April 14th to buy the entire company at $54.20 per share. $54.20, because in there is $4.20. So the $4.20, of course, is a reference to cannabis smoking. And so he made his bid $54.20. I'm sure that wasn't a mistake. $4.20 is a better way to say that. When the stock at the time was around $46, so you hold this stock, you want to go sell it, you can get $46, and here comes some guy and says he's going to buy it. He's going to buy it from you for $54.20. So that's a pretty substantial gain that you could get as a shareholder in one day. And by the way, the stock had rarely traded above that $54.20 number. It had traded above that $54.20 number, but rarely. Since its history of going public like 8 years ago. And 8 years ago, it went public at around $45. And when Musk made the bid, it was around $46. And so it was a rare technology stock that really had gone nowhere. So Musk was to made this offer to the board of directors. And, it's not the board of directors that are selling their shares. It's the shareholders that are selling their shares. And so when you make an offer to the board of directors, what are you doing? Well, you're really asking them for their support to say, yes, we want to sell this company. And then they would send out materials to the shareholders and say, as your representatives, as the board of directors, we think you should sell. And, if 66 2/3 of you, or 80% or whatever the deal is, agree to sell, then the rest of you will be, will sell as well under corporate law. And that's how that works. An option to that would have been doing what's called a tender offer, just going straight to the shareholders, which would be hostile, but you don't have the board support, but you're just making an offer to the shareholders. But he didn't. He went to the board, and then the board opposed the deal. They said, no, we don't want to sell to you. You've been sending out mean tweets. They didn't say that, but, it was right in the middle of all that. Clearly something was going on, and the board enacted what's called a poison pill. So what is a poison pill? This is another M&A concept that we can learn. So far we've talked about buying up a piece of a public company just out of the float, out of the publicly freely traded shares that are in the public market, which you can do to a certain limit. We talked about joining the board versus not joining the board. If you do join the board, you have fiduciary duties. You have to look in the best interests of the company as opposed to yourself. There was some sort of limit that if you joined, you could never own more than 15%. And so he didn't want to do that. So we talked about joining the board or not. And we talked about making an offer to the board for board support, which is a nice, clean way to go about an acquisition, versus going as a hostile bid, as a tender offer straight to shareholders, which he did not do. And now we can talk about another concept, which is a poison pill. And so the board said, no, we don't want to sell to you, so we're going to implement this poison pill. Well, what is a poison pill? A poison pill is a plan that has been agreed to by the board and the shareholders at some point in its life. Otherwise, it wouldn't be valid. And it is intended, there's all sorts of ways to accomplish this, but in general, it's intended to hold off hostile bids, to make it more complicated and more expensive for people that want to buy the company when the board doesn't want to sell to that acquirer, which was this case. So how does it accomplish that? Well, this one in particular had and I'm getting this from news reports, and I found they were inconsistent and wrong. And I did not go back and read the shareholders' rights plan, which is probably what the poison pill was called. I did not go back to read it myself. But apparently it was triggered by a 15% ownership. So if anybody acquired 15% without board approval, and Musk at that point was around 9.7%, then this poison pill, the shareholder rights plan, would kick into effect. And what almost every poison pill does is it attempts to dilute. If you have, let's say I'm trying to buy the company and you're the company, I get to a certain level, in this case 15%. Well, your plan as the company is that you can now sell new shares to anybody in the world cheap at a discount. Okay, at a discount that is not available to me. I'm the only person that's not allowed to buy these cheap shares because I'm the person that triggered this. That's generally what the plan would say. So the plan would say, well, Musk, if you get up to this 15% and above without our approval, it triggers our poison pill, which means that we will do through what's called a rights offering, probably. Again, I didn't read this myself, but a rights offering will go to all the shareholders to say, hey, you already own a share. You have the right to buy another share at, say, 80% of market price. So there's a 20% discount. Just making the number up, didn't read the plan. But generally like that, right? And then so a bunch of people would want to buy those shares at a discount, and the company would issue a bunch of more shares, which would have the effect of diluting Musk because he used to own 15%, but now there's a bunch more shares outstanding. So that automatically pushes them down to whatever, call it 10%. And then to buy more, it's more expensive for him because there's more shares outstanding, and it just becomes a gimme for existing shareholders that are not the acquirer and really punitive to the person trying to be the acquirer. Okay, so it dissuades anybody coming after the company without board approval. The board that's making $3 million a year. So the board enacted the poison pill. Musk started threatening going through with a tender offer, so going straight to shareholders. We had Jack Dorsey, the original founder of Twitter and ex-CEO, who's still on the board. To my surprise, I always thought he was a bit on the crazy side with the censoring and social agendas, but he actually started tweeting that the board of directors of Twitter have always been the problem with Twitter, have always been the problem, and started tweeting out ideas that were complementary, synergistic, or counter to Musk's ideas. It wasn't an argument; it was an add-on, which I thought was fascinating. And so the board was fighting against it. It was pointed out by numerous people that the board has a fiduciary duty to get the most money for shareholders. And then you add the mainstream media, the left. So, everybody other than Fox News, basically up in arms about billionaires controlling the media. That this Musk is going to come in as the richest guy in the world, as a multi-billionaire, controlling an important media platform. Forgetting to tell you that all media, such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, are owned by billionaires, right? Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. So they're all billionaires. What is the difference to have a billionaire that is just a billionaire they don't like that owns Twitter? And by the way, the board members and the original owners of Twitter are also all billionaires. Everybody's a billionaire in this story. And so the idea that you don't like one billionaire over the other because he's a billionaire just seems sort of crazy to me. So anyways, you have all this drama leading up to it, which was really fun for a couple of weeks. You could talk about it with your friends every day if you're in the space. Elon started tweeting that he was going to go straight to shareholders with a tender offer. He announced that he has all the financing lined up to do that. And then a rumor started Friday night that the board of Twitter was warming up to this. Clearly, they had no other ideas. It was reported in the Wall Street Journal today that Musk had conversations Friday night with a number of the key shareholders one-on-one, and clearly those shareholders got to the board, and we have a deal today. So we've talked about a number of M&A concepts. We've talked about what I thought was some of the fun of this. Why should we care? What is the importance of this from a global perspective? You know, I was looking up today the number of social media users on various platforms, and it's just shocking. You know, Facebook has 2.9 billion active monthly users. So active users in millions, but I believe that's active being defined as a month. Okay, so 2.9 for Facebook. YouTube, which is Google, is 2.5 billion. WhatsApp, which is also Facebook, is 2 billion. Instagram, which is also Facebook, is 1.5 billion, basically. Whereas Twitter is 436 million. So, and that would be active monthly users. And then I've seen another stat, daily active users on Twitter around 200 million. So it's quite a bit smaller than the other large social media platforms, quite a bit smaller. But in terms of global influence, I don't think there's any doubt that Twitter is by far the most dominant. You know, it's a broadcasting tool. It allows for conversation. People, you know, unlike, you know, in an Instagram or Facebook, which I don't ever use, but Instagram I use quite a bit, and you can respond to the comments, you can type things out, but it's not really the same and as a back and forth conversation like almost live streaming by text that Twitter is. It's very much the feel of sending a text message, a short text message, if you haven't used Twitter. And so it's not the biggest, but it is the most influential in the sense that most of the news of tomorrow is the Twitter stream of today, right? So news is breaking. It may or may not come from a journalist. It may come from people on the ground, but the journalists jump in and they start crafting their narrative on this, and they see what is liked by their community. They see what is ignored or hated by their community. And what you end up with is basically a storyline in tomorrow's newspaper and TV, but it starts on Twitter. It starts on Twitter. So that's one hugely influential piece of Twitter. And then other people like me, I've for years now, I've read all my news on Twitter, not all of it. But you can go to your major newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, and they have a Twitter feed, and they tweet out their headlines with a link to the article. The same on all the papers that I try to pay attention to and other news sources. Twitter is really just a good interface, a good way to start off and get a synthesis of what's going on today. And so it's influential from that perspective. Is it drives the news that I'm going to read today, and the narrative on breaking things that you hear about only on Twitter first drives tomorrow's news. And so if there's a current event going on, a riot or a war or, whatever thing is happening that's really current, you go to Twitter. You don't go to CNN.com or MSNBC.com or Fox.com. You go to Twitter because that's where it's going to be most current. You're going to get and you're going to get the on the ground type of information. When the war broke out, which I'm not supposed to talk. Well, I can talk about this. We're not going to advertise this show. So when the war broke out in Ukraine, I was getting direct messages on Twitter every day, and it was links to people, really being current and putting forward what's going to happen, and that's where your news is. It's this really, really influential platform. You could argue that Obama and Trump both won their elections by dominating Twitter, which they did. They both dominated Twitter, and before Obama, Twitter wasn't really a thing, but with Obama, it was a big thing. And his campaign was terrific at tweeting and generating a following and persuasion on that platform. And then, of course, Trump was banned, forever as part of the culture war on this. And we don't need to get into that further. I spent probably too much time on this Musk thing. I just love the story. So, as I said, when billionaires fight, it's always entertaining. It's a good story. We've learned something about M&A. It's always good to take a current event and pick out some of the turns from that, like offers to the board, tender offers, poison pills. And so there's some ideas of the M&A process, because despite all the drama and the funny tweets, this was a pretty typical process. This is sort of how M&A of a takeover a public company goes. I've done it myself. And this one was super public and I think really consequential. Do I have a hot take on this? I don't know. Not really, but Elon seems entirely driven by missions to save humanity. I mean, he thinks so big. I think that's a superpower. And then he executes on it. He just thinks so big. Tesla is not a car company. It's the number one company intended to fight global warming. Those are his words. He was having talk about Twitter again. He was having a Twitter battle with, no, that's not true. He was having a text battle that got into the New York Times and then it got into Twitter. So that's where I saw it with Bill Gates. So Bill Gates was texting him, wanting to talk to him about philanthropy, about charitable donations. And I guess it was surrounding global warming initiatives, to which Musk replied, "Do you still have that $500 million short against Tesla?" So a short in public markets is when you're betting that the stock's going to go down. So you sold the stock now at a higher price and you buy it later at a lower price because you're betting the stock's going to go down, and that's why they call you short. You sold it, but you didn't even own it yet, so you were short. But then you got to go buy it, right? As opposed to buying long, which is what you would do if you normally just go out and buy some shares, and you're hoping the price goes up. You're hoping that you bought it today at whatever, and then you sold it tomorrow at whatever plus a premium. And so, why would someone short $500 million of Tesla stock? Well, there's two reasons. One is they aggressively believe that the stock's going to go down, because that's a lot of money to put on a short. Or you're actually trying to make the stock go down, because if you sell enough shares without owning them, you're just going to crash the market if you can keep that sell pressure on those shares. Because at the end of the day, public markets pricing, it's supply and demand like everything else. And so if you have a bunch of supply, if you got somebody trying to sell into the market, even though they don't own the stock, maybe you're trying to kill that company. So Musk said back to him, "Do you still have that $500 million short position?" To which Gates replied in the text, "Yes, I haven't unwound that. Sorry." And Musk said, "Well, I can't, what did he say? He says, I can't take your initiative to fight global warming seriously when you have such a short position against the one company that's doing the most in the world to fight global warming." So that's how we blew off Bill Gates. And that was all by text message, I understand, which then got leaked and then they were all over Twitter. So the point being that Musk, really is driven by these global humanity-saving initiatives. Global warming, colonizing Mars to get the hell off of Earth and diversify, moving traffic underground, putting neural implants into brains for whatever reason of humanity saving that would be. I don't know what. And now he's looking to avoid and mitigate division and world war by opening up free speech, which has certainly been censored by Twitter, the de facto town hall, as he calls it, and saving humanity from itself. And he's driven, it seems to me, by those grand ambitions and noble goals, whether you believe them or not. I think that he believes them, and that's the point that I'm trying to make. And there's no reason that Twitter won't be the same, is not the same. And there's no reason that Twitter shouldn't be a tremendous success, just like all his other companies have been, through his unquestioned skill and work ethic and persuasion ability. So my hot take is I'm excited. I think it's going to be a great improvement to the platform. And I think that people are going to feel safer tweeting on there now, and that they're not going to be shadow banned. Their account's not going to be locked out. They won't be banned forever, and their entire investment in that platform being lost. So there you go. There's the story of Elon Musk and Twitter as it stands right now, and it should just close unless we have some twists. A couple shows ago, the last time I was here solo, I answered some user questions, and I think there was one that I didn't get to yet. And there's probably a bunch on my email I haven't seen. I've had a busy few weeks here, but leftover from last show, a audience member sent a note in and says that near the end of an episode, you mentioned answering questions with the truth without conditions. You mentioned answering questions with the truth without conditions. Does this mean simply owning up to what happened, however unsavory it was, without justification? For example, a year ago, I was in a role where I was unfriendly. If someone were to ask, weren't you unfriendly in that role? Then is it best for me to say, yes, which is true, rather than, yes, I was a different person, which is also true. So I think the premise to this, is that the right word, or the trigger to this is I was talking about something in my life. Lots of things in my life. But one thing in particular I was talking about, which I think triggered this, is I had a regulatory settlement, and it was from back it was like over 20 years ago, 21 years ago, something like that. And so it was a regulatory, I don't want to say review, it was stronger than that. I can't think of the right word for it, but there was hearings. There was hearings and pleadings and all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, I settled, and I was happy with my settlement, and I didn't really impact my life one way or the other. But you have this public record out there. You have this public record of this settlement statement. And in this jurisdiction, unlike some of the U.S. jurisdictions where you can settle without admitting anything, in this jurisdiction, certainly at the time, you had to admit stuff whether you believed it was true or not. Otherwise, you weren't going to get a settlement agreement. And so that's just part of the deal of entering into the settlement agreement. So I did that. And if you were to do a bunch of research on me, ultimately you would find this thing, and it is what it is. And so you have this cloud hanging over you. You have this baggage. You've had this, mistake, whether you thought it was a mistake or not, from the past. And how do you handle that from a persuasion perspective? Because the question had been asked to me about new business and new relationships. I was talking to somebody about this morning who's in the middle of a significant litigation. He retired or quit his job. I don't know if he claimed constructive dismissal or not, but then he got screwed on his vacation pay and his stock options, so he sued the company for that, and they countersued for $150 million for reasons that fail me, and I think fail him. But he has this story attached to his name, this negativity attached to his name, and it really bothers him. He's up in his fancy country club, and him and his wife worry about meeting new people because they're, immediately going to Google him and they're going to find this stuff, and it's, it just puts him in a bad position. Well, for me, the way I handled this situation was to, if somebody looks it up and says, hey, I found this thing on the internet, is that you? My answer is yes. Just that. This is just yes. Because my expectation is that if I were to say, yeah, that's kind of me, well, that's not working. Or if I said yes, but, and had an excuse for it, it just begs more conversation and shows and throws doubt over it. And what I've learned is I've just say yes. And 9 times out of 10, the person just moves on to the next conversation. And I will say I've never lost any business that I know of over that situation. Now, I said 9 times out of 10, maybe 10% of the time, they come back and say, oh, could you tell me a bit about it? And at that point, I have a narrative that I talk about. And my narrative, it doesn't complain about the situation. It doesn't say I was a victim. What it focuses primarily on is a couple of key facts that help the listener, the person I'm talking to, understand the severity or lack thereof, and in this case, lack thereof, of the situation. Like, I know it sounds bad. Consider this. Fact 1, fact 2, fact 3. Oh, and I don't say, so therefore it's not bad. I just let them conclude that. Those are facts that they can't argue with, as opposed to judgment on it. And then I say, the interesting thing is what I learned. And I tell them what I learned out of that. Because who hasn't fucked up? Everybody's fucked up in their life. And the key is not to focus on that. The key is, what have you learned from that? And does it make you a better person, ultimately, because you learned from it? And so this person's question, I think that was the trigger for this. And I think it's a good persuasion lesson. It's a way to handle, some fear and rejection and negativity and baggage in your life. And so this person says, if someone were to ask, weren't you unfriendly in that role, then is it best for me to say yes, or yes, I was a different person? So I think in that situation, again, you have to have your framing. Think narrative. You have to have your story, and you have to not be a victim. So you can't say, I wish that hadn't happened to me. In this case where it's, in my case of a regulatory settlement, that's kind of black and white. You can't argue about that, but you could have the opportunity in, were you kind or unkind? You could be, oh, well, that's really judgmental, or the other person says that, but I don't agree with it, or whatever. And I think all of that is just weak sauce. I think that the right answer to this is, weren't you friendly? If you were, just say yes. If you don't think you were, then say, I believe that the other person thinks that. Yes. Right. So you don't say, I don't believe it's true, but yeah, I believe the other person thinks that. Yes. Right. And then either say right away, or be prepared to say, be prepared to say, it's what you're saying is fair. I don't think I handled that well. Certainly learned some valuable lessons on that. And I think that's your framing. I think that's your narrative. Always focus on what, in that situation, what you've learned. What have you learned from this fuck up in the past? And then actually learn it, right? This is not about just messaging. It's about facing reality. It's about being honest with others and with yourself, and about being a better person, no matter what you have stumbled over. And so for me, I say yes. And if they ask more, I give them my facts and what I've learned out of it. And the facts lead them, any reasonable person, to conclude that the severity is not at all what they thought it was. And in fact, that it's kind of just stupid. But I don't say that, right? And I think in your case, I think you can do the same thing. I think you should do the same thing. I think the answer should be yes. Or if you don't think it's yes, that you acknowledge that the other person thinks that, fairly or unfairly, right? And that you don't want to say you were a jerk in the past, that you're a different person, because we all screw up. Don't make excuses. You just want to say, I don't think I handled that well, and I've definitely learned some lessons from that. Simple as that. I don't understand how anybody, what else? Think about it. If I was the one asking you these questions and you said to me, yeah, I didn't handle that well, and I certainly learned a bunch of lessons from that. what else am I going to ask you in the negative? I have nothing else. I might ask you, really, what lessons did you learn? Which is an opportunity for you to turn the conversation back into your benevolence points, into being a good person, into being a competent person, into being a trusted person. You've turned that conversation right around. So I know that's a little bit of nitty gritty on negotiation and framing, but that's how I would handle that. And hopefully that helps you on that situation. Let's talk about KPIs, key performance indicators. What are KPIs? And this, I think this is one of the most important concepts. This is on the technical side of my content, by the way. KPIs are one of the most important concepts in managing a business, in any business. So KPI is an acronym for a key performance indicator. And a key performance indicator is one of the 3 or 4 or 5 metrics, numbers, ratios, percentages that drive every business. They drive every business, okay? I've been modeling businesses for over 30 years, and you can always identify the handful, 3, 4 key assumptions, key KPIs that are easy to understand, and that if they're going in a positive direction, your business is going in a positive direction. If they're going in a negative direction, your business is going in a negative direction, right? And so, for an example, at a manufacturing company, a distribution company, which I ran in the past, the KPIs that I was using and relying on included the backlog. And a backlog is, I have a bunch of orders in-house that I need to fill, and I haven't filled them yet. So my backlog is $1 million or $500,000 or whatever. So that would be a dollar KPI. What's my backlog? Fill rate. A fill rate in that sort of business is, if I have an order in-house, I received that today, and my policy is to ship in 2 weeks. I either shipped in 2 weeks or I didn't. That would be 100% fill rate if I did on that individual order, or a 0% fill rate on that individual order if I was late or didn't deliver at all. And then if you apply that across all your orders in a large, in any reasonably sized company, even a small business, you come up with a percentage. And your percentage could be, 98% fill rate. 98% of the time, I ship that order in full on time. 2% of the time, I don't, right? And when I walk into a troubled company, often their fill rates are like 30%. Or 0%. They just have a messed up supply chain. They can't deliver a product. They can't deliver services. And this is a manufacturing company, so this would be a product one that we're talking about. So that's what a fill rate is. And it's a key metric for me in that particular company. The cost of my direct materials as a percentage of revenue. So that would be your direct materials cost as a percentage of revenue, right? And your direct labor as a percentage of revenue. So those were my 4 KPIs that I can, and the beauty of those in that particular company, and the beauty of those is I can remember them off the top of my head. I can remember that my direct materials to revenue needs to be 52%, right? And so I can remember that my direct labor to revenue needs to be 22% or better, right? So 52% for direct materials plus 12% for direct labor is 64%. If I want to price a new job, right, can I do this and manufacture the stuff, and what price do I need to get? Well, there's a key metric for me is my direct materials. The price needs to be enough that my direct materials and direct labor are around those percentages within that KPI. Otherwise, it's going to drive that KPI in a negative direction. And it's more than that, but these are the key assumptions in that particular business. And there was really only 4 of them. And so that's an example of what a KPI is. Now, is this important? Well, I've found over 30 years of working with troubled businesses, I found that nearly all of them that have operational problems, as opposed to a troubled business, which is really a balance sheet restructuring problem. Often most companies have both operational and financial. Some have just financial. and some have just operational. But anytime there's an operational side to this, the management teams have lost sight of their KPIs. There's too many other minute-to-minute fires. They don't track their KPIs. It's really hard to do when you're busy doing other stuff. I fall victim to this myself and have been for the last couple of months. I've fixed that this week, I believe. But they don't understand them. The management teams don't understand them anymore. They don't understand the importance of the simplicity of them. They fail to monitor them. They fail to get reported on them. And if they're moving in the wrong direction, they fail to take corrective action, because if they're moving in the wrong direction, you're screwed. You're just done as a company, because those are the key assumptions. If your margin is shrinking, and that is the most sensitive assumption within your profit and loss statement, and you're not doing something about that, you're not raising your prices or cutting your costs, you're in serious trouble. You're not going to survive. You need to change that momentum. That's one of the reasons this show is called the Winning Momentum podcast. So we see this all the time in troubled businesses. I was recently working on a turnaround in which we agree with management on the KPIs. We measure them historically over 5 years. Hey, look at back 3-5 years ago when you were making a ton of money, these KPIs, these percentages were at this percentage. And then when you started to get in trouble, look how those assumptions just started going downhill, right? What a coincidence that is. And we agreed. We agreed that every single year that since the trouble started, those KPIs were getting worse. Yet despite that fact, the troubled company management, they insisted they were not in operational trouble and that things were going to improve just around the corner, right? You get this as a management team, you get this confirmation bias. You get this twisting or ignoring of facts to support what you believe in or what you're trying to sell to somebody else. And that can be the death of companies. It's often the death of companies. So a remedy to that is understanding your KPIs and just being ruthless about that. And that, folks, is my commitment to myself, to hold myself responsible or accountable for those KPIs. And I'm hoping that has a big impact for my businesses in 2022. How do you know what your KPIs are, what you should be relying on? Remember this. There are two financial tools that every business should be maintaining. Two financial models. One is a 3 to 5 year rolling monthly model, which includes your balance sheet, your income statement, your cash flow statement, okay, and related assumptions. We do all ours on a spreadsheet. And the second would be a 13-week rolling cash flow model. Now, if you have tons of cash in the bank and everything's fine that way, maybe you don't need to do the detailed weekly cash flow. But for most companies, very helpful to do the 13-week rolling cash flow. The rolling monthly model, the first thing, the 3 to 5 year monthly, here's our projections, here's our historical and here's our projections, requires you to have some assumptions. And that, to me, this model as a whole is the Bible business plan. This is what we're doing. People ask for our business plan. There it is. It's a bunch of numbers. It's not in writing, but there's a bunch of numbers and projections, and that is the company's plan. Everything is inherent in that. And the model has assumptions in it, and the way you build your assumptions will, if you do it properly, will drive out the KPIs for you. Let me give you an example. Accounts receivable. What are accounts receivable? Well, this is the accounts that people owe you. People owe you money. You have to collect it. That's an account receivable. So a typical way that an accountant might review accounts receivable is they say, well, my ending accounts receivable, right, for the end of this month is equal to my opening accounts receivable. So what I started with plus my sales. So what I started with plus what I'm adding to it minus what I collected, right? So what I started with, what I'm adding to it, minus what I'm taking away from it equals my ending. That makes perfect sense. And if you're an accountant, you would call that an accounts receivable roll forward. But nowhere in there is there a metric, a KPI, a ratio that a manager might be able to think about to understand what their receivables are, right? So it's a pure, technically accurate formula. Opening plus additions less collections equals ending. That's absolutely accurate. But another way to do that exact same formula, not the exact same, but to project your accounts receivable, might be to say, what if we say that our accounts receivable ending is always equal to, say, 45 days. So you take the last 45 days of sales, because 46 days ago you've now collected that. So you're going to see, on average, I'm going to collect my receivables in a month and a half, 45 days. So you take your, to make it even simpler, you could take your sales from last month times 1.5. That's sort of a 45-day assumption. All right. And you're going to end up with basically the same projection number. You could do it both ways, but you end up with more or less the same number in terms of, your projected financial statements, in this case, accounts receivable, but you have a KPI, you have a metric, you have a key assumption, and that key assumption is 45 days. And now when you put your actuals into your model, you can look and go, oh, my 45 days isn't 45 days at all. I'm actually collecting in 60 days. Okay, so it's an extra 15 days longer. And if I change my assumption to 60 days throughout this whole model, look at that, I run out of money. Okay, and so that's a problem. So I need to be better at collection. That's my issue. I need 45 days for this business to work. I'm collecting on average in 60 days. That's not going to work for me. I need to do something different. There's all sorts of things you can do different. You can change your terms. You can hire a collections person or be more aggressive yourself to collect. You could have a better line of credit where you could finance those receivables so that it didn't matter so much if you collected them in 60 days instead of 45. The point is, you got triggered by that KPI. And it's simple, and you can understand it. You can remember it. I collect my receivables in 45 days. Salesperson comes to you and says, hey, I've got this new account, and here's the pricing I gave them, and they're going to pay in 60 days. You can say to yourself, wait a minute, what's that going to do to my 45-day KPI, to the assumption that I use in my model? How's it going to impact my cash flow going forward? It's a very useful tool, okay? And you need KPIs in general to manage your business. They need to be limited to 3, 4, 5 super easy to remember KPIs that your business is mostly sensitive to. You build the sort of models that I'm talking about, you will find there's always that limited number of assumptions and that are key to driving the business, and you can track them easily. Do you remember the last time you climbed an extension ladder? I'm holding up here. I know on the audio podcast you can't see this, but on YouTube you will see a beautiful yellow ladder mount. And this is a tool that you can put up with a broom pole and hang it on the gutter of a house, and it's got protection for those gutters so the ladder doesn't scratch it or crush it. And then the ladder leans up here on the face of that thing and stabilizes the ladder. So one of a kind gutter guard. It slips easily into place using a broom pole. As I said, from the safety of the ground, the ladder mount is designed to fit standard gutters and can easily be placed over the gutter brackets. You'll notice the difference as soon as you begin to climb. Ladder mounts provide a stable base for your ladder, giving you the confidence to climb safely. I need that confidence. I can tell you that. Home do-it-yourselfers love the ladder mount because it gives them peace of mind when climbing a ladder. Ladder mount will save you hundreds of dollars by protecting expensive gutters. Where do we get this ladder mount, you might ask, which I believe is under $50, by the way. If you own a ladder, you have to own a ladder mount. Check out roofersworld.com, roofersworld.com. I know there's other sites on there, but for sure you can go to that website, roofersworld.com. You can find the ladder mount. You can buy it online, or you can go to, if you're in Canada, you can go to Home Depot, Rona, Lowe's. Did I just say Rose? I'm just merging those companies together. Lona and Rose. Home Hardware, I believe, lots of different, all your favorite do-it-yourself stores, and a bunch in the U.S. too. I won't try to drop the names off the top of my head on that, but mostly just go to Roofers World. They'll tell you where they're sold, or you can order it directly online. If you own a ladder, you should own a ladder mount. All right, with that, I want to thank everybody for listening to the Winning Momentum podcast for this week. I hope we all had a little bit of fun and learned a lot. Check it out. Check it out. All the past content on thescottsinclair.com, thescottsinclair.com. If you like this, please subscribe on the website. We're also on YouTube, the Winning Momentum Podcast. The Winning Momentum Podcast on YouTube and Apple, Spotify, and all platforms where you listen to your audio podcasts. Talk to you next week, everybody.